Hey everybody! Thank you for joining me for another episode of Rachel Out Loud. Oh my gosh, I've been gone for a minute. Over the last few months, I've been asking myself, like, what is going on? Why are you not recording? Why are you not posting? It's crazy because I actually recorded an episode like two and a half months ago, and I just never posted it, and I don't know why. Every time I go to open it and start editing it, I'd be like, not really feeling this. So I just never posted it. I don't know, something just felt off. And it definitely had nothing to do with like time. And I definitely wanted to keep posting, but I just couldn't. So I had to think about it for a while. So the episode was about religion. And I realized that I probably wasn't saying everything that I felt I needed to say in the way that I needed to say it, right? Religion's really important to me. It's a huge part of my life. And in the episode, I was sharing stories about the very strict right-wing, uber conservative, evangelical Christian world that I grew up in. Talking about that's fine, but I wasn't really addressing what's underneath it for me. What's underneath the beliefs, right? What did it actually do to me? I think that it affected everything. How I think, how I view the world, how I move through the world. So I had to ask myself, why does religion affect you so deeply? And in my family, I always have people telling me, oh my gosh, Rachel, why are you so against religion? If you're so against religion, you can't respect other people's religions. And religion is a part of people's culture. It's a part of their identity, their upbringing. And I don't know. It's not that I don't respect religion or belief systems. I just have a real problem when fear is dressed up as belief. So believe whatever you want to believe. I have no problem with that. But I think it stems from the way that I was raised. Because the way that I was raised, it wasn't just about believing something. There was so much emphasis on what happens when you don't believe. Growing up, everything was about hell. Everything. If you were a Christian in the 80s or 90s, you know that there was a huge emphasis on hell. And as a really young kid growing up in New York City, I vividly have memories of, I saw it everywhere. People preaching on the subway, people preaching on the street corners, my father included, my uncle included. There were signs that people would hold up about hell and billboards and in churches. Pastors were constantly talking about hell. I mean, people used to hand out tracts, my parents included. If you don't know what a tract is, it's like a little pamphlet that people hand out to you on the street, and basically it tells you about God. And it walks you through how to be saved or how to ask Jesus into your heart, which is like the terminology that's used. And to be fair, I get it. Like, if you think hell is a real place and you think that there's a possibility that your loved ones might go there, then of course you're going to warn them. Of course you're going to tell everybody, like, hey, get it together or else this is going to happen to you. So I get that, like, completely get that. But you also have to admit that fear is a huge part of what pulls people in, if that's your message, right? And I think fear for me showed up in my life really early when it comes to religion. So like I had an aunt, and I have an aunt, but at the time she wasn't saved, or at least that's what I was told. And I remember being on the phone with her all the time and crying, begging her to please ask Jesus to come into her heart because I didn't want her to go to hell. And I mean, I was like 3 or 4 years old, just bawling my eyes out over my aunt and the thought of her going to hell. I didn't want her to suffer. Obviously, I loved her, right? But it was fear that had me panicking, fear that had me completely distraught. And that's the part I think we don't talk about enough, because if fear is the reason you believe something, then is it really belief or is it just you surviving? I think for me, it showed up in smaller moments too. I remember something as simple as playing Nintendo as a kid. Let's say I'm Mario and Mario dies. If I said, oh, I'm dead, or like, oh, you killed me, that wasn't allowed in my house at all. Like, my dad would get so upset. He would say, hey, stop saying that. You're speaking death over yourself. Don't say that. And eventually it got to the point where he would just be like, hey, if you say that again, I'm taking that Nintendo. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. The console was taken, put up in the closet somewhere, never allowed to play it again. Crazy. And I definitely didn't understand that as a kid because it just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, so God's just floating around in the clouds, waiting for me to say something wrong. Like, oh, she said she's dead? Okay, say less. Zap. It just didn't make sense to me at all. And to be fair, I understand now, like, the idea wasn't literally God's just sitting around waiting to zap people, right? The point was more about words having power and not speaking certain things over your life. To be fair, I gotta say that. But even in moments like that, you're constantly learning to monitor yourself and to be careful about every little thing that you say. And again, I'm not saying that words don't have power, but that mindset doesn't come from a place of peace at all. I think it comes from anxiety and from fear. Something else that really bothered me as a kid, there was the rapture. What? I was shook. I was so scared of the rapture. It was probably the biggest thing on my mind as a kid for like years. The rapture had me terrified. I would wake up at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and run to the window of my bedroom to check outside to make sure I didn't get left behind. And I mean, part of that came from these movies. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s in church, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. There was this movie called A Thief in the Night, which comes from a Bible verse, right? Jesus is like a thief in the night when he comes back to take all the Christians to heaven. That's called the rapture, right? So he takes all the Christians to heaven with him and they just disappear off the face of the earth instantly. The Bible does say he'll come like a thief in the night, right? So in this movie, the rapture happens in the middle of the night. All the Christians disappear. Everyone wakes up realizing their loved ones are completely gone. Their neighbors are gone. Their husband may be gone. Their kids are gone. All the Christians just disappeared. And everybody left behind has to get the mark of the beast on their hand or their forehead. 666 was the mark of the beast. If you refuse to get the mark, they come and get you. I'm talking vans rolling up in neighborhoods in the middle of the night, dragging people out of their house, kids, women, grandmas, like everybody. And I think they put you in like some kind of like concentration camp or something and give you a certain amount of time to like decide to get it. And if you still didn't get it, if you still refused, you get your freaking head chopped off. Okay? So I started watching these movies when I was like 2 or 3 years old. They were always like on in my house. And I was so scared. So yeah, I'd wake up and check. Sometimes I'd check on my sisters in the middle of the night because in my mind I was like, okay, if my youngest sister, who's a baby, is still here, then the rapture couldn't have happened. Because obviously she would have been taken too, right? So I'm safe. Like, that's so crazy. Thinking about that today as an adult, it's so freaking crazy. Like, I was just constantly scared of everything. I was constantly thinking, what if something happens while I'm sleeping? What if the rapture happens? What if I did something wrong before the rapture? Like, what if at 3:59 in the afternoon I do something wrong and I don't have a chance to ask God to forgive me and he comes at 4 o'clock? I'm screwed. There was just this fear of just getting it wrong. And I don't think that's belief, right? And I remember trying to explain it to my mom when I was a kid and tell her like, hey, these movies really scare me. I don't want to watch them. Please don't put that on. And I remember she'd always be like, well, what are you afraid of? Because you're a Christian, right? So if you're a Christian, you have no reason to be afraid because you're not going to get left behind. And that was like the reasoning. It didn't help at all. I don't know. But the wild thing is like you grow up in an environment like that, you don't even realize how much your life is being shaped by anxiety because it just feels normal. That's just everyday life for you. And even when I think about something like prosperity theology, like how crazy that was. So like I grew up in a household where it was heavily influenced by megachurches and prosperity theology. I was taught that if you wanted something, you had to plant a seed. Usually that meant money. So if I wanted a new bicycle, I couldn't just pray for it. I had to give money. I had to give financially. And I had to name my seed. It's called naming your seed. So our lives kind of revolved around this. Like if there was anything my family really needed, yeah, we'd pray for it together, but we also would give an offering. My parents would give an offering, either send it into one of these mega churches or give it to our church on Sunday. And we would constantly confess that we believe we received this thing after we pray and ask for it. And so I think for like a whole decade, my parents were actually like believing God for a candy apple red Dodge Caravan, right? That they never got. And when it didn't happen, the problem is that nobody ever questions the system and says, maybe we were taught incorrectly, maybe this doesn't work. It's always, what did we do wrong, right? Did we believe enough? Did we doubt? Did we miss God somewhere? Like, did we not hear him? And so I think as a kid, you kind of internalize that. Because now it's not just about faith, it's about pressure, anxiety, self-surveillance, hypervigilance. And eventually, systems like that don't even need to control you anymore because you start controlling yourself. You're constantly monitoring yourself, what you're doing, what you're saying, whether you repented or not. My gosh, my biggest fear was forgetting that I did something and not repenting of it. And then I'm going to hell. Like, that's crazy. Because there was this whole idea that if you sin, even in a small way, and I say small in quotation marks because you're actually taught that all sin is equal on a spiritual level. So if I steal a pack of gum from the store and don't repent, now I've opened the door for the devil to attack me and God can no longer protect me. That's another thing we were taught about protection. So now I can leave the store, get hit by a car, and somehow that's justified. But if I hadn't sinned, then God would have protected me and stopped me from getting hit by the car. That's what I was taught, which is absolutely crazy. Because that kind of thinking changes the way that you view the world, right? And the way that you move through the world. And so fear wasn't just about hell and the rapture. I mean, it was wrapped up in so many different parts of the culture I grew up in, like purity culture. My gosh. Imagine you're 17 years old and your parents call you into the dining room one night and they tell you, guess what? You're getting married. You're like, married to who? Married to Jesus. And on the table, there's an open Bible and a ring box. And that was so normal in the 90s. Like that purity culture thing was just so normal. I mean, I'd say 90s, early 2000s, in right-wing evangelical homes, girls as young as 10, 11, 12, all the way up into their 20s were having like full-on ceremonies in church, in front of their families, communities, congregations, promising their purity. They're promising their bodies to God, swearing that they wouldn't have sex until they were married. And a lot of the time, it wasn't really a choice. I mean, it was just something that was expected. If you didn't want to do it, what's wrong with you? Like, you want to have sex before marriage? I think actually all my sisters wound up doing it. But before my sisters, there was me, because I'm the oldest. And my parents didn't even ask me if I wanted to do it. Like, there was no conversation beforehand. Like, hey, do you want to do this? Is this something you're interested in? No conversation, nothing. They just assumed that I would just because that was like the culture. So they randomly called me into the dining room and started talking like it was just about to happen, like with the ring there and the Bible open and everything, like we're about to do this. And so as they're talking, I'm sitting there and I'm just laughing in my head, like there's no way I'm doing this. Like you didn't even ask me if I want to do this. So when they were done with their little spiel, I told them no and like laughed, like no. And it was because it didn't feel like my belief. It just felt like their freaking pressure. And I don't know, honestly, I heard an influencer say recently, like before you could even have, before you could even have custodianship over your own body, you were being married off to Jesus. That was the culture. I think when you grow up in an environment shaped by fear and anxiety, it doesn't just affect your beliefs, it affects how safe you feel with people, how safe you feel emotionally, how safe you feel being vulnerable. And that, it definitely had an impact on me emotionally. My dad was a pastor. He helped people. He worked with kids. He showed up for everybody constantly. But at home, he was angry, like a lot. Screaming, explosive, aggressive, over the dumbest things, little things. And I remember thinking as a teenager, like, How are you helping everybody else's kids when your own kid is in her room, depressed and crying all the time? You don't even notice. How are you preaching about loving your family and treating people right, and then coming home from church and exploding over something completely insignificant? I felt so invisible growing up. I really did. And I think experiences like that made vulnerability feel unsafe to me extremely early on. Because when the people who you're supposed to feel emotionally safe with don't make you feel safe, you start to guard yourself. You start shutting parts of yourself down. And honestly, I think that followed into adulthood. I know it followed into adulthood in a lot of ways, right? Fear of vulnerability, fear of letting people get too close. Because in my mind, closeness just meant getting hurt. Not even the possibility of getting hurt. Like, it meant you're getting hurt. And that's what I saw, because there was my mom, right? I watched my mom, and it affected me so much too, because as a kid, what I saw was someone who made herself small and made herself vulnerable in ways that seemed so painful. I saw someone who depended completely on another person, emotionally, financially, spiritually, everything. And I remember thinking, not even as a teenager, as a kid, I was like, I never want to be that vulnerable with anybody. I never want to give someone that type of power over me. And a lot of that was tied into the religious culture that I grew up in. There was a huge emphasis on women being homemakers, staying home, raising children, submitting to their husbands. And there's nothing wrong with being a homemaker if that's what you genuinely want to do. But growing up, it didn't feel like it was presented as one option among many, right? It just felt like it was the ideal. Like, this is what you should be doing. Sure, not everyone can do it, but this is the ideal. This is what Jesus would want. And watching that dynamic play out in my house made me become so emotionally closed off. And honestly, vulnerability is still something that's extremely hard for me to deal with even today. A few years ago, something happened to someone I love, to my daughter, someone very close to me, my kid. And it completely shattered me, right? Because growing up, I was taught if you're obedient, you're protected. If you pray over your children, God protects them. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we pray over her every day in our own household. And then I have family all across the country praying for her consistently, like I know they are. We're going to church, we're reading the Bible, we're doing our devotions, we're trying to live as godly as possible, stay close to God. So it's like, what the hell happened? And I have to be honest, for a period of time after that, I didn't believe in God. I don't know how long it was, maybe 9-10 months, maybe a year. I just did not believe in God. Because I was like, if this could happen to her, an innocent kid whose parents and grandparents, great-grandparents tried to do everything right, followed God, taught their children the word of God and how to live righteous lives. If this could still happen to her, then there can't be a God. And so that was one of the loneliest feelings I've ever experienced. And it wasn't because I didn't have people around, that loved me, but it was because I felt like there was no one bigger than us watching over us, no one protecting us, no one caring about us. We were just alone. And I remember I felt so devastated to my core, the pit of my stomach. I just felt so alone. Because in my head, there was always a God. There was always this God in the sky that loved me, and was watching over me. But I'm grateful today that I don't feel that way anymore. I really had to step back and start exploring what I believe for myself. And that made me do that situation. And in a way, I've done that all my life because I've always been questioning things. I'm always skeptical. I brought up different questions and ideas to my parents. I constantly am bringing things up to the people around me. But I think fear did shut a lot of that down. And it didn't allow me to fully embrace the journey of discovering what I believe for myself. And so what I realize now is that I don't need to know. I don't need certainty about everything. I don't need to have all the answers. I'm okay accepting that there are things I may never fully know or understand. I mean, there are. It just is what it is. But I have started to figure things out for myself, like what matters to me. Because I don't think you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I do believe there's something bigger than us. I do believe I have a creator. And I still deeply resonate with the teachings of Jesus. So I still consider myself a Christian because of that, because I believe Jesus just taught love. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is just the way I think I want to live my life. I know I want to live my life that way. So I don't know, I think I figured that out for me. But personally, one of the things that matters most to me is reducing suffering. If I don't want to be hurt, why would I want to hurt someone else? If I don't want to be in pain, why would I want someone else to be in pain? And for me, that's a good starting point because that doesn't come from fear. That comes from empathy, that comes from understanding, from choice. And that feels very different than the belief system I was raised in, because I don't think real belief needs fear to hold itself together. And I definitely don't have all the answers. I never will. But one thing I do know is fear will not be the foundation of my belief anymore. It will not be the foundation of my life anymore. And honestly, I think that's why I kind of started this podcast in the first place. Not because I think I'm right, not because I think I have everything figured out and want people to listen to me. Not at all. But because I think people should be allowed to ask questions. I think that people should be allowed to ask questions out loud without making other people feel like, oh my gosh, she's like letting the devil in. And, I think people should be allowed to change, to rethink things, to admit that they're unsure about things, to figure out what they actually believe for themselves. And without feeling like they're bad people for that. Because I think religion has a way of shutting down curiosity. It has this way of making people feel like questioning things is dangerous. And I lived like that for a really long time. So for me, this whole journey has really been about trying to separate fear from truth and trying to figure out, what do I actually believe because it genuinely resonates with me? And what did I believe because I was just afraid not to? I don't know. I've always been the kind of person that would rather sit with uncomfortable truth than comforting fear. And if nothing else, I hope this episode at least makes people stop and think about the role that fear plays in their own lives, right? Because sometimes fear gets so normalized that we stop even recognizing it. And we just call it wisdom or morality or obedience. And maybe sometimes it is. And maybe sometimes it isn't. Maybe sometimes it's just fear wearing a different outfit. I don't know. Something to think about, I guess. So thanks for sitting with me, and until next episode.